When Scrooge, at the very end of the book, after he's changed, he suddenly shouts out, "I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't mind. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop!" So he's stepping outside of time. It's like he's reborn in an impossible way, an old man becoming a baby who doesn't know what day of the month it is. But it's part of the whole way that the time is central to the book, but also disordered and deranged by it. So A Christmas Carol is full of markers of time. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. So it's both fairy tale time, once upon a time, but also a specific place and time, it's Christmas Eve, in a contemporary realistic world of cold and hunger and poverty. People talk incessantly about time in the book. Scrooge says to his nephew in the opening scene, "What's Christmas time to you? But a time for paying bills without money. A time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. Time, 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 time," and then it ends with the word dead. Both matter to this book. Death, of course, is the end of a life, and Scrooge himself seems in many ways to be a kind of living corpse. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shrivelled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office in the dog days, and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. And if Scrooge is one kind of living corpse, alive but without feeling or care for others, Jacob Marley is another. The story begins, Marley was dead to begin with. Some editions print it with a comma in the middle of that sentence, but Dickens put a much more emphatic colon. Marley was dead to begin with. That hinge in the middle immediately alerts us to how things might get reversed or put in different order, that Marley might be dead to begin with, but he might not stay that way. In the story, Marley is bound by time, by all the things he's done in his life that are shackled onto him forever: cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. The story is about the unshackling of time, in the spirit's ability to time travel, to go back and forward in time, to allow what seems to be irreversible, Scrooge's death, the stripping of the corpse, the death of Tiny Tim, to be only one of many possible futures. It's a radical grasping of the openness of the future, the unknowability of what is to come. In public readings, in theatre adaptations, in films, across a huge array of different adaptations and reworkings, A Christmas Carol has worked itself into the hearts and minds of so many readers that it has a cultural power like that of almost no other literary text. The only exception, perhaps, might be a Shakespeare play, such as Hamlet, that other ghost story, which of course appears on the very first page of A Christmas Carol. It's a literary text that reaches back into the past to Shakespeare and forward to the Muppets' Christmas Carol, to Blackadder's Christmas Carol, to ballet, radio, TV, mime, musicals, opera, and innumerable stage and cartoon versions all around the world. Like the spirits, it goes back and forward in time. But to understand that amazing cultural phenomenon, let's go back to 1843, the year that it was first published. In the half-century or so before then, Britain had seen unprecedented changes. Hundreds and thousands of men, women and children had left the land to work in mines, mills and factories of the Industrial Revolution. They lived for the most part in extreme poverty, with no welfare state or unemployment benefit, no national health service, under a callous or indifferent state, with appalling housing conditions, terrible sewerage and disease, with workers at the mercy of their employers and of sharp fluctuations in trade. Families would be crowded together in cellars, rivers were open sewers, children worked appallingly long hours in terrible conditions in mines and factories. Britain was the first country in the world to go through these transitions to modern industrial capitalism. And Dickens was fascinated and repelled by a society that seemed to be replacing all traditional bonds with financial ones, with what Thomas Carlyle famously called the cash nexus. Karl Marx, who hugely admired Dickens, wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848, not long after A Christmas Carol, and he spoke of how all fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air. Well, lots of things in A Christmas Carol melt into air. The spiritual world, the world that the spirits invoke, comes very close to the material world that defines Scrooge's life. And both those texts come from the 1840s, a very difficult decade, often known as the Hungry Forties, where a trade depression in 1839 was followed by a series of bad harvests that caused widespread destitution and suffering. That's the place from which A Christmas Carol comes. But where does it take us? Well, Dickens knew firsthand what it was to be one of the very poor in society. When he was 11 or 12, his father was arrested for debt, and as happened in those days, he went to prison. Dickens' mother and his younger brothers and sisters also went to prison, as he did in those days. And little Charles was sent out to work at a blacking factory, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He earned 8 shillings a week, just over half what Bob Cratchit earns in A Christmas Carol, out of which he had to pay for all his own food, and he sometimes went without his dinner. Almost completely neglected, as he wrote later, I might easily have been, for any care that was taken of me, a little robber or a little vagabond. Dickens didn't flinch from depicting the horrors that he witnessed, for he'd known them personally. The only people who are happy when Scrooge dies are the young couple who are in debt to him, as Dickens' father was often in debt. But Dickens didn't just want to show the terrible things that surrounded him. He also wanted to think about ways of overcoming them.